Good morning, everyone. You're listening to Trace Elements Radio, live, of course, with your hostess, Tracy. We're on Trace Elements Radio and Revolution Radio Studio A. Good morning, everyone. Well, we have a lot to talk about. I am feeling pretty weak again today, so I'll do my best to get through it. And thank you, everyone, for the questions that you've sent. I will attempt to answer as many as possible. It's so funny, when I plan a show, I usually think I'm just going to go esoteric and talk about the past, or I'm going to just do the news and talk about what's going on now. But they're so interlinked now that the world is so occulted. It's really funny. So we have to start with this. The first American was just knocked down. Now you're probably thinking, what do you mean? Well, Benjamin Franklin, known by his contemporaries as the first American, toppled over on Monday. So May 16th, Boston's first and oldest portrait statue, so it's his rock, was blown over by a wind gust for the first time since it was erected 160 years ago. Franklin, big deal for the United States, Renaissance man in many, many ways, inventing devices that would transform the world before the age of social justice warriors began to have careers as protesters, of course. So you often hear my American brothers and sisters saying the founding fathers would roll over in their graves. In this case, the first American was knocked down. And amongst the litany of metaphors that I'll be bringing up today, this is just another one, and you can bet there's going to be lots more to come. Because as I probe deeper into the days between dates, how this connects to Philadelphia and the Pope's visit, along with the book of Revelation, which they are playing out right in front of our face. And I think you'll appreciate the significance behind this first ever wind gust toppling down our big BF. Let's go back, because I've had some questions about this and people are seeing the links between things. The wealth inequality at this moment on planet Earth has reached truly, truly epic proportions. And if you go on traceelementsradio.com, you will see some articles up from today, one of which 62 individuals amass the same wealth as 3.7 billion. And most of us intuitively sense that this outcome was rigged by design by a few, a very, very few, for the single purpose of wealth extraction. We know things, like I do have a link called Citizens United. We know that those with money can influence elections, set it up, decide who wins. And of course, the Koch Brothers, part of the cabal that purchased this little piece of legislation, we get that bankers who collapse the financial system made out like bandits, quite literally. Those unlucky enough to be born any place where the tornado of colonialism has touched down have been taught that our people should blame ourselves for the personal character flaw of being on the receiving end of the conquest and the rape and the pillage. What we've been lacking, I guess, is a name for this completely integrated system of tax havens, corporate handouts, gutted governments, privatized lands held in common, and so forth. So I'm going to use the phrase global architecture of wealth extraction, just because I like a name. And I want to describe for you how this makes up the core of all political systems everywhere in the world. I did have some diagrams and figures and facts, but I have to admit that about an hour before the show, my arms stopped working, so you just have to imagine. It starts with the great tree of poverty. On one side, you have global elites and mega corporations. On the other side, you have worldwide trade regimes. And the grouping together of economic, political ideas. So let's start off with just before the 16th century. It's what I'm going to call the British enclosure movement. From there, wealthy merchants and aristocrats privatized the commons, common folk, everything that's owned. They kicked peasants off land. This is the birth of capitalism. They turned land into sheep runs, created agribusiness. Millions of people were forcibly displaced. This is going towards the 17th century. So this is the concept of mass poverty that was then born. So the impoverished, the new refugees, had no choice but to accept the slave-like conditions and the rock-bottom wages of factory work. We start moving towards the 18th century. And deep into it. So then we have colonies of India and Africa, British colonizers. Now remember, when I say British colonizers, they worked much like Rome. So the people who are fighting are not the elites. A few of the elites may be in charge, but they don't actually fight. And there are people who are not from Britain doing most of the fighting, like Scots and the Irish and, everybody. This is always what happens, and this needs to be kept in mind. When things are blamed on people, remember that very few people are in charge of these things. We can't blame the British for this. It's always poverty. Always. We've been herded. We've been gutted. So British colonizers, using that term. India. So taxed, forced peasants to grow crops. You'll find this has a lot to do with agriculture all the time. Then the crops are exported to England. Then privatized common forests and water systems. As this is going, when a drought came, more than 30 million Indians died of famine. So exports to Britain increased by 300% during the period of drought. Africa removed people from their land and taxed them. Survival became dependent on wage work in factories and plantations. produce goods, well, it was done cheaply for European consumption, not the consumption of African people. So we start moving into the 19th century. I realize I'm skipping over a few things as we go, but I'm talking about the big hits here. We have in the West Reaganomics. So President Reagan cut the top marginal tax rate from 70% to 28%, reduced the maximum capital gains tax to 20%, raised payroll taxes on the working class. Social inequality in the United States at that point increased by an unprecedented rate. So the Republican goal was an across-the-board flat tax. So Western countries forced a new neoliberalism on all developing countries. Neoliberal globalization. This is for the rest of the world. So International Monetary Fund, World Bank, push high interest rate loans onto developing countries. They create the third world debt crisis. They impose structural adjustment programs to force countries to repay those loans. Countries had to reduce spending on health, education, and development. Countries forced to export more to raise enough money to pay their debts. Poor nations remained poor, or got even poorer. So debt repayment was made the priority. Standards of living lowered worldwide. So we start sliding into the 21st century here. 2%. The richest 2% have more wealth than half the rest of the world. Rich companies give about $130 billion in aid to poor countries each year, but they take $90 billion out of those poor countries through a form of tax avoidance called trade mispricing. So these are the rules of the planet. And I realize this is more down and dirty, but we intuitively get that the game has been rigged for quite some time. Most of us don't know the details of how things got this way, but the architecture of wealth extraction had to be carefully built in waves of creative destruction over a span of several hundred years. I don't think thousands, guys, I think hundreds. Now, in the earliest days, a business or a suite of business innovations like double entry accounting, joint stock companies, were combined with a systematic policy of kicking people off commonly managed lands, so that a system of rent seeking could be built up for wealthy people to extract money from working poor. This is done in the 16th and 17th century. Britain, of course, this was done there in what is known as the enclosed or the enclosure movement. And I'll try to get a link for you later on today about that if you're not sure what that means. But it laid a groundwork for the massive colonial empire to grow as Britain and other imperialist powers spread this kind of wealth extraction across the world. But it happened to the Europeans first. It worked so well there that it continued. Now, the first wave of mass poverty in modern times was the British and the French, the peasantry. When those societies overthrew corrupt leaders and established democracies, the elite had to find subtle ways to keep siphoning off wealth, thus growth and growing social inequalities that didn't conclude with rolling heads at the guillotine. Almost. That was another time that we almost won, believe it or not, we as a people. But anyway, so they invaded more and more foreign lands and did their rent seeking there. This is how mass poverty of India, many African nations, most, if not all, of the First Nations here on Turtle Island. This is how it was accomplished. And it is accompanied by systems of racial inequality and their social control mechanisms at home, because it worked so well there. So they pitted working class of their own nations against each other as they took the motto of wealth hoarding to new levels in developing markets like those of the spice trade, later oil and coal and natural resources. This is the dichotomy that you're hearing in Canada. People saying, but if we stop mining for the oil and extracting the minerals and extracting the diamonds and everything else, we will be poor. Canada is run like this. Yes, it's run like this now. Then people saying, but you're killing the land. The land is being raped. We are seeing more than an economic failure here. We are seeing a resource failure. We are seeing our planet saying, I can't take this anymore. Now, whether or not we blame ourselves or some of the ancient methane deposits in Russia, the earth doesn't care who's causing the damage. She doesn't. It's like mom coming in the room when she's had enough of our shit. She doesn't care who started it. But she will finish it. This is where we are now. And this is what people forget when they're arguing about, we can't stop the oil. We're going to starve. This is how you get Native people fighting against Native people. This is how you get Black people fighting against Black people. It's how you get the colonists and the colonized fighting against each other. People are trying to survive. They forget the big issue is that we shouldn't be fighting each other. We should be working together. And those assholes over there started this. Okay, so this is how it's done. Pitting one group against another, one nation against another. Wealth hoarding. Because the spice must flow, and the spice could be whatever it is they want. Now flash forward to the 20th century, and you see the high art of wealth hoarding become digital with their new accounting systems, the structural debt repayment programs, the free trade agreements that actually privatize public lands, and the invention of personal lines of credit to keep people enslaved to mortgages, consumer purchases. We talked about this before. And later, so-called austerity programs that actually got public coffers to feed private financiers after they orchestrated the deregulation and the collapse of financial markets So said another way, the seeming lack of choice amongst political parties has less to do with political ideas and much more to do with economic ideas. That forms the core logic of this planetary scale system. The whole nations thing, it's hilarious. It's the movie 1964. It's fake. This has not existed for quite some time now. So to get a real sense of how big this is, consider if we were to tax a mere 10% of the money hoarded away in tax havens, we would have at least $2 billion. That could be used to fund universal basic income. Universal, that means everyone. Universal health care at this moment for more than 7 billion people. Free public and university education for everyone on planet Earth. Fund basic scientific research for all the major problems humanity must confront. We could make a transition to ecologically based energy systems, urban design that staves off the potential for collapse of our highly unsustainable civilization. 10% of the money hoarded. That's it. The architecture of this wealth extraction is a cancer on this planet. It continually corrupts the government, poisons the natural environments, pits us against each other in a race to the bottom, because that's what it is. That has only one logical outcome. It will be the wholesale destruction of life-giving capacities for the only home planet that we have. And I think it's time to systematically dismantle this system. This system of wealth hoarders. We know what it is, how it was built. We can tear it apart piece by piece and replace it with something better. But we have to stop blaming someone who is not your color or not in your nation. It's hilarious that people still believe they have a nation. Like, have they not read a piece of paper? I don't know. We are watching our climate change in front of our eyes. And as I will say, as I've said before, the earth doesn't care if it's our fault or if it's methane, just methane being released. Enough carbon dioxide gets in the air. Enough methane, well, methane specifically, gets into the water. We lose our plants, specifically trees that basically hold the ground together. Then that's it. We're done. We're done. That's it. So, as Canadian officials firming up plans last year to bring thousands of Syrian refugees to Canada, I've wondered, what do we do about our needs of our own community? As many people are wondering this. When we look at Attawapiskat First Nations and all of the northern communities, there is a relentless wave of suicide attempts increasing. So much so that at least 10 different First Nations communities have declared a state of emergency. We are crying out for help. Now, we must ask, because we are seeing here on this continent what has happened on every continent around the world when the takeover happens, that First Nations live in third world conditions. Why is it so easy for their governments to welcome refugees and offer them first-class citizenship when First Nations communities are dying? Canadians, as we have seen with the fires that are still ongoing, by the way. As a matter of fact, they've doubled in the last 24 hours. Canadians are not hard-hearted people. We're not. But we never quite get these questions answered. We get a runaround. When we ask for little things like additional housing, clean water, stop stealing our diamonds, things like that. It's not an issue of Canada bringing in refugees. And I'm sure this is echoed by people from all over the world who are taking in refugees right now. What would have given me comfort would be if we know that the people here are being helped to have a safe, livable community. Now, Apawapiskat, as we have said before, has been plagued by emergency in recent years. Housing shortages that left families living in tents, unheated trailers, severe flooding, sewage backups blamed on substandard infrastructure. Communities 2- and 3-bedroom homes often house as many as 15 people, and they are contaminated with mold. Now, this similar situation plays out in more than 100 of Canada's 634 First Nations communities. It's a stain on a country with global reputation for welcoming. Why are we living in third world conditions when the government is inviting people in, spending millions on strangers, if not to make people angry? Now, looking at this, and I realize I see it from a different angle than most people, because I can see both sides. But when you see the suicide attempts on First Nations communities that are reaching up to half of the children on one reserve, some of which are actually going through with it and killing themselves at a rate that is more than 25% higher than non-Indigenous people. These challenges are massive, and it's just beginning. because we are also dealing with what I have called the climate refugees, because this is coming. This is 100% coming. I also realize that many people don't want to see this. It would be much easier not to see this happening. But I do. I see it. I can't pretend not to see it, because it's official. We're entering Earth's 6th mass extinction rate. It's happened before. Obviously. At least once, from a great big rock either being hurled at us, or there was a nuclear war here on this planet. Could be either way. And again, the planet doesn't care which it is. 6 times on Earth, we have been wiped down to less than 5%. Only 5% on the entire planet survived. So, when I look at what's happening here on this Earth, it seems fairly obvious to me that we're in trouble. And again, not caring who started the shit. It needs to stop. And, the clock is ticking. We also have to expose the new military. Expose their funding. Who really owns it? Who controls it? All of this new military-industrial complex. Well, this information is available online. I have links. Google recently took the hard numbers, turned them into an interactive map, which I have on the page, that tells you just where their weapons are going and how much countries are spending. Chart is divided by imports and exports, as well as military or civilian classes, which refer to the type of weapon, i.e. revolvers, sporting rifles, civilians, assault rifles, machine pistols, military, except in the States, obviously. So rather than who it's being sold to, Google has also helped build the system to explain the tool and the major gaps. But the system itself is both easy to understand and fascinating. The focus is where it's from, who's spending the money. And I'm sure you won't be surprised on who's spending it and where. Because the people who are taking over this planet, who are in charge of killing it right now, are my neighbors. And I realize there's a few people in charge of actually doing what's going on the planet. So in 1,000 years, will they remember that the majority of people that are still fighting in your military are from people who are from elsewhere? I don't know. I want to go back in time a little bit. Once more, I guess. About a third of a century to 1978, when something strange happened on the remote Bell Island, Newfoundland. Very quiet community, some fishermen, scattered families on small farms. A smattering of little hamlets, tiny places. It's the last place on Earth you'd expect to be rocked by a sudden, shattering explosion. But it wasn't just an explosion. And what should have been a sleepy Sunday morning electrical appliances on the island burst apart. Animals fell over dead. Buildings rent asunder, torn in half. Though the explosion was the loudest anyone had heard there, ever, it seemed to have no epicenter. And to this day, the cause of this one incident is unknown. Ideas, conspiracy theories abound. You can look it up, the Bell Island boom. It has become, to some people, proof of government tests of secret superweapons. Now, Newfoundland is a large island off the east coast of Canada, and within Conception Bay, at its eastern end, is Bell Island. Tiny, relatively small island, about 9 kilometers long, 3 kilometers wide. Significantly, part of its history began in the 1890s when rich iron deposits were discovered and mining began. Tiny Bell Island actually became one of the world's major producers of iron ore and even saw action in World War II. It was attacked by a German submarine. The mine prospered until the 60s, when pressure from cheaper competition finally forced closure. Bell Island, with its low-lying in general, with its highest point only a hair above 100 meters. So its deep mines were almost entirely below sea level, requiring a constant pumping to keep the water out. So while it was productive, it was always expensive, always dangerous. And since the mines closed, they've been full of water. The island is now laced with tunnels and entrances and passages that lead to underground lakes, marking the top of the water table. It's now a site of interest to cave diving adventures. With its mine closed and its small economy ruined, shambles, the communities on Bell Island have been largely emptied out for more than a decade. When the Bell Island boom struck, Sunday, April 2nd, 1978. Without warning, a sudden bang rocked the whole island. A giant electric shock. By some reports, it was heard as far as 100 kilometers away. There was extensive damage to all of the electrical wiring. One property, that of the Bickford family, reported physical damage to the building. There were holes in the roof. Their television set and fuse boxes actually blew up. The roof of their chicken coop was destroyed. 5 chicks inside were killed. Near the shed were 2 or 3 holes in the snow, which looked like some explosives had gone off. Digging in the holes found nothing. And then the strangest of stories began trickling in. Bickford's young grandson reported a hovering ball of light after the blast. A woman on Newfoundland reported a beam of light slanting up in the sky from Bell Island. Several people on the island said that they heard ringing like a tone just before the boom. There was a documentary in 2004 called The Invisible Machine. Postulated that the Bell Island boom was a test of some electromagnetic pulse weaponry. This particular theory deeply, deeply flawed and depended on a whole bunch of hypothetical things, like a beam weapon, being attracted to the iron ore from Bell Island's old mines. The filmmakers were apparently pretty confused to think that natural iron ore is terribly or a terrifically powerful magnet, which it is not. So they are like what I like to call wrong. Anyway, although iron is magnetic and can be magnetized, natural ore has its molecules all jumbled up in every direction, rarely happens to have a significant magnetic field, surprisingly enough. Certainly not strong enough to divert or attract any kind of particle beam. Now, fueling the fire of conspiracy theories about weapons testing was a mysterious presence of a man called John Warren and Robert Fryman from Los Alamos National Laboratory, then called Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory, in New Mexico, who happened to show up right after the boom struck. To many, this is confirmation enough that Bell Island had been a weapons test. But I think they came to check it out and to answer some questions, especially for the Americans, because we're relatively close, of what the heck happened. Now, we go to the electric universe theory because there's been a lot more booms happening lately and strange fireballs that they can't be meteors. They're not meteors. They're not. So, electric universe. To understand what the boom really was, first we have to understand the concept, the context in which it took place. So about 4 months before the boom, the entire eastern seaboard had been plagued by a series of unexplained booms. This is again happening now. So beginning in late 77 and fading out in the mid 1978, some 600 of these so-called mystery booms left reporters and the publics scraping their heads from South Carolina up to Canada. The same conspiracy theories surrounding Bell Island boom have been proposed to explain the mystery booms happening now. Everything from tests of some super weapon by the United States or the Soviets, or to an atmospheric doomsday device inspired by Nikola Tesla. Even a massive nuclear device like conveys proposed sky scorcher. You can look that up, sky scorcher. It's actually kind of cool in a, oh my God, they didn't build that thing sort of way. And no, they didn't. So, as it turns out, the majority of mystery booms were solved with a disappointingly mundane explanation that paled beside the much more intriguing conspiracy theories. Many witnesses have noticed and are noticing that the mystery booms seemed to politely follow a predictable schedule. There is a reason for this. Now, according to Dr. Gordon MacDonald, who spent several months compiling a report on the booms for MITRE Corporation, which is interesting, all, hand of Gaudy sort of thing. Of the nearly 600 booms recorded, 2/3 of them were attributed to the sonic booms of an aircraft, most notably the Concorde. Concorde began its flights between New York and Europe only a few days before the first mystery sound happened December 2nd, 1977. Now, because of sonic boom concerns, Concorde was required to take a wider path out to sea, especially on hot days. This is important. Fuel expansion requires pilots to shortcut over Nova Scotia in order to retain required fuel reserves. On some days, these booms would propagate up to 100 kilometers by bouncing between two main refractory layers of the stratosphere. But there's always more happening when it's warm. Keep that in mind. So, eliminating the booms that could be traced to that supersonic aircraft, that left nearly 200 of McDonald's mystery booms without an explanation. He attributed them to natural phenomenon, but of what nature, he didn't know. As it turns out, the reason the guys from Los Alamos were there is that they did know. Warren and Fryman, F-R-E-Y, man, had been monitoring imagery from Vela satellites. A fleet of 4 satellites kept the globe under constant surveillance at the time, looking for distinct signatures of nuclear bomb detonations. They also picked up large lightning flashes. And it was in part anyway, from the Vela satellites that we learned about lightning superbolts. About 5 of every 10 million bolts of lightning is classified as a superbolt, which is just like what it sounds. A really big bolt of lightning, lasting unusually long, about 1,000th of a second. Superbolts are almost always, in the upper atmosphere, usually over oceans. That's why we're hearing more of this on coasts, but not always. So often, these upper atmospheric storms can occur with people on the ground being unaware, perceiving nothing other than a clear sunny day. So Dr. William Don, Chief Atmospheric Scientist at Columbia University's Lamont Dowery Observatory, compiled reports from airline pilots of extremely high altitude flashes that correspond with nighttime mystery booms. He said the daytime and daylight booms have high altitude flashes as well, but if we don't see, and we won't be able to see them from below because of the daylight. Now, although versions of this story on the internet often claim that Warren and Freeman scooped around, went back to Los Angeles without a word to anyone, that is a lie. And the truth is that they spoke openly with the media and with other scientists investigating Bell Island. Now, according to the CBC Canada, the reporter Rick Sierra, who spoke with Fryman off camera, Warren and Fryman had been tracking superbolts over the East Coast since December 1977, and they learned of Bell Island boom and saw that it correlated with a rare overland superbolt. They were asked to go check it out and to see what kind of damage it might have caused. They were surprised that the damage to Bickford's property was not worse. Now, Warren's specialty was in plasma physics. Freeman was an expert in RF and its propagation in the upper atmosphere. He's best known as co-developer of the RFID technology. They certainly had a professional interest in observing the aftermath of a Super Bowl. There is no evidence to support the hypothesis that the Bell Island boom was the result of any kind of man-made thing, or a super weapon, or a super secret government installation, and all the pieces are in place to support its characterization, its idea as a freak lightning superbolt. This is what's happening on the planet. We are in electric skies. It would be probably a lot nicer for people to believe that it's HARP, that the governments are doing this, because to know that it's nothing that we could do or stop is, well, it's scary. Now, popular tellings of the Bell Island story refer to Warren and Freeman as military attacks, including the Invisible Machine authors and super secret MyLab stuff. So I suppose you could call them, if you're so inclined, call them that. Los Angeles Alamos is a government facility, but Warren and Freeman were both very well-established scientists with publications and legitimate credentials. Whether this qualifies them as men in black, I suppose, a matter of personal language choice here. Their visit to Bell Island is reasonable. It's consistent. I understand that too with government weapons plots. But in the same way that my ownership of a toothbrush is consistent with a government plot to keep my breath minty fresh, imagination is the only evidence supporting either plot. So I hope that answers your question a little better, Nelson. So, electric universe. All evidence that does exist is consistent with the lightning supervolt. And this took actually quite a bit to find, because people want to talk about conspiracy theories more than truth. Now, the destruction of electrical appliances is due to a staggering voltage propagating through Bell Island's copper power grid. The damage to the chicken shed roof and the electrocuted chickens, they were electrocuted, inside also consistent with lightning, as were the holes in the snow outside. An angled beam striking the island, reported by a witness on Newfoundland, could have been a lightning bolt. And it's anecdotal, and the CBC reporter dismissed it as unreliable. The high-pitched tone preceding the boom is interesting. Could have been anything. We'll continue this and go on. You're listening to Tracey Elements Radio. Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Tracey Elements Radio, live today on the 19th. Wow, this month is going by fast. I know I say that all the time, but it really is. So what are we seeing? And yes, I'm very sorry. I wanted it to be a super secret weapon, too. I don't think so, though. Not this time. What we're experiencing. On my Facebook page, I put up an article that I just happened to have put up 2013 on Today, called Comets and Dragons and Prophets of Doom. Because our ancient myths suggest that a giant comet may have visited the Earth a few thousand years ago, raining fireballs, meteors, etc. And scientists are recognizing that life on Earth has been affected, if not largely shaped, by our celestial environment. We now recognize that throughout history, the Earth has been bombarded by comets, and asteroids and meteorites, small rocky bodies, smaller particle and dust showers. And over the years, astronomers have detected a substantial population of such small bodies out there in the solar system, confirming that the threat of their impact on Earth is quite significant, not imagined. So when we look at our skies, which are very, very busy right now, there's also a piece that I want you to take a look at, if you have time, with an astronomer who went on TED Talks and talked about what's out there. Now, the title is unfortunate because it says, is it Naribu or Planet X? It has nothing to do with that. Talking about the shape that some people are calling the structure, and you can see lots of information, but this is from scientists who actually discovered the thing, and they point you to citizen astronomers who are still in the process of looking at it. What's most interesting about this structure is it's not a circle, it's not a globe, it's not planet-shaped. It actually looks like it's a cube. And around the cube is a swarm of something. Comets, meteors, asteroids, the invasion of the body snatchers. Is it the Borg? We don't know. It's on its way. And as a matter of fact, it's not just a cube. It's a shape-shifting cube, which is cool. But it's coming. Scary, somewhat. Somewhat scary if you think that's, with all the problems going on planet Earth, I'm not so concerned about whatever this is. We don't know yet. As I hear more information that we can back up, I'll talk about it. But it's only 11-minute YouTube. It's worth checking out, I think. What's happening is we are on a fast track here. Surprisingly fast. Fast track. It's entirely possible that humanity is about to face the shock of a lifetime, and we are caught off guard. Our governments aren't ready. Most of us aren't ready. And as we will see, we will be blindsided by a crumbling ecosystem, spawning tens of thousands of ISIS-like fighters formed into competing gangs, struggling for survival. And whammy, we are all gone. What if the biosphere is already under such stress by planetary boundaries, or the capacity of our planets is abhor life? What then? As for global climate change, which 100% is happening, I again am in the one cold spot, and it would be much easier to say it's HARP. Because saying that at least lets people who want to have faith that the great and powerful Oz, the government, is large and in charge. You know, people want daddy, even if it's bad daddy. I realize they want to look at daddy. I get that. But non-consensus school of scientific thought, consisting of small minority of scientists, believe that the ecosystem is at risk of collapse within their current lifetime. Scientists do not pull punches. They rather tell it like it is, as they see it, and they are being silenced. Most leading climate scientists are not willing to honestly expose their greatest fear. As discovered by Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! While at the COP21 in Paris this past December, interviewing one of the world's leading climate scientists, Kevin Anderson of Tidal Center for Climate Change Research, who said, so far, we simply have not been prepared to accept the revolutionary implications of our new findings. And even when we do, we are reluctant to voice such thoughts openly. Many are ultimately choosing to censor their own research now. My thoughts to that would require so many bad words that, even I can't get away with it. But straight away, we know from one of the world's leading authorities that climate scientists are censoring their own research. They are lowballing the figures. Consider this. Imagine trying to get a research grant or private funding for work that exposes the truth. That's the quickest way to forward to the unemployment line of sour-faced scientists. So at the Paris COP21, it was agreed by almost every nation on the planet to take defensive action, but on a voluntary basis, to limit the change, to enter 2C post-industrialization, preferably 1.5C Celsius. Mainstream thinking says anything over that level will cause all sorts of problems in our biosphere, from flooding of major cities going on now, to droughts going on now, to starvation going on now, leading to the splintering of society into tribal warfare going on now, similar to what's now evolving along the southern Mediterranean, throughout the Middle East, most of the planet. However, what if the climate is not on side with the mathematical models of consensus? What if 2 degrees Celsius is already cooked into the books, yet only a blip on the way to 3 degrees Celsius, 4 degrees Celsius, or the infamous 6 degrees Celsius that wiped us down to pretty much amoebas on the planet, the last great extinction. Already, the Arctic is rapidly, ultra-rapid, turbocharged meltdown phase, which could fry humanity to a crisp, burnt alive, as gigatons of methane, gigatons, are released from under that ice. However, this occurrence is controversial within scientific communities. Nobody knows what'll happen when, and that's true. Still, then COP21 should be ringing big sounding alarm bells across the land, all over the planet, pressing siren buttons. All hands on deck. Let's get planting trees, because that could help. Because of oxygen that they breathe out. Breathing in the carbon dioxide. Fixing a whole bunch of things, holding our ground together. Obviously, that would scare the public. But, we got to talk about who's going to the bathroom. But this would cause panic, maybe triggering a nasty revolt by the populace against fossil fuel interests and the neoliberal interests that sacrifice a sustainable ecosystem for profit. Only profit. Who knows? It could get bloody. Temperatures look set to soar over the coming months, over the Northern Hemisphere at large, over the Arctic in particular. And very disconcerting, from January 13th, 2016 to April 11th, 2016, most of the Arctic Ocean was already more than 6 degrees Celsius warmer. That's 10.8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than from 1981 to 2011. Already reached the 6. As goes the Arctic ice, so goes an out-of-control, bonkers climate that is deadly, dangerous. The Arctic is in crisis. This is not my opinion. This is from Ted Scambos, lead scientist in the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. Arctic sea ice sets wintertime record low. This was published March 26th, 2016. 2015, sorry. No, March 26, 2016. If the Arctic is in crisis, then, by definition, the planet is in crisis. Welcome the old clarion bell in the public square. It should be ringing like friggin' crazy right now. This requires hard choices. This would be hard choices that we could make together. If we told the kids, you know what you're going to be doing at school right now? We're going to teach you how to plant stuff outside. You're going to be spending your day outside, spreading seeds, apple trees. We should all be doing that right now. We're getting to a point where it's a if you want to live scenario. Now the temperature rise is even higher when looking at measurements from land-only stations. Image compares with the March 2016 temperature within a period from 1890 to 1910. 250 kilometers smoothing, showing a land-only anomaly of 2.42 Celsius or 4.36 Fahrenheit. This is the monthly global mean surface temperature. Arctic News, April 16th, 2016. So forget COP21. It's already passé. We're past that. Now, according to Arctic News, April 16th, again, by 2026, temperatures will be 3.9 Celsius on the low side or 10.4 Celsius on the high side, warmer on land since the start of the Industrial Revolution, which adds up to a disaster on the low end. On the high end, a gigantic worse disaster. Total ecosystem collapse, hitting hard. Tribes of fearful humans huddling around the North and South Poles, scaling coconut trees to obtain sustenance. And I don't know about you, but my fat ass will not be scaling a freaking coconut tree right now. I'm lucky to stand up right now, and I don't know what's going on out there, but something is. For instance, my dad was away for a couple weeks. You know, he's a musician, and he travels around playing. He's totally fine. He came home, and suddenly he can't walk. No reason. We don't know why. But this is happening to me. I'm back to using a friggin' walker. I can't go for my walks. I've done nothing. If anything, I am doing everything I'm supposed to that made me feel better. It's no longer working. Something's changed. So not only is this strange warming contributing to the process of ecological collapse, a study of 22 biologists and ecologists claims that the world is close to a state shift that will trigger an ecological collapse. Here's the issue. Already 43% of ice-free land has been converted for crops and livestock and cities. But the study shows that when more than 50% of land is lost, i.e. the planetary boundary, ecological web will collapse. So we summarize evidence that such a planetary scale, critical transitions have occurred previously in the biosphere, albeit rarely, and that humans are now forcing another such transition with the potential to transform Earth rapidly, irreversibly into a state unknown in human experience. Now, according to James H. Brown, microecologist at the University of New Mexico, co-author of the study, this scares the hell out of me. We've created an enormous bubble of population and economy. It's just unsustainable. It's either got to be deflated gently or it's going to burst. That great big thing was the title. Or we can go by Justin Gillis, who said, "Are we nearing a planetary boundary?" It's smaller. Not more accurate. I like the other one. Now, for example, the average person in an industrialized country requires the equivalent of 2 to 5 hectares, so 5 to 12 acres. You see how I went and looked this up for you? Because you usually say, we don't know what a hectare is. So now we know, 5 to 12 acres of productive land to sustain material consumption. This is derived via research flows of goods and services. However, there are only 1.5 hectares per capita of ecologically productive land on the planet. This is from World Resources Institute. Ipso facto, there is a sustainability gap already, which helps to explain why the natural capital depletion is ongoing rather than a sustainable flow of natural capital. In fact, rough calculations suggest ecological footprint of industrial nations representing less than 20% of the world population is larger than the available ecologically productive land on Earth already. In other words, 20% of the world's population consumes 100% of the ecological productive capital on the planet, beyond which the natural capital goes into deficit. so helping to clarify why 2.7 billion people live on $2 per day. And it will stay that way. It's simply not possible for everyone in the world to consume at a current industrial levels without risking the irreversible resource depletion and ecosphere collapse. We can't do this. We can't live like this. So in consequence, an impending clash of global warming, planetary boundary, as it exceeds 50%, may well trigger unimaginable, colossus ecological collapse, similar to an asteroid collision, loss of food resources, massive drought, brutal global warfare. On a scale beyond imagination, humankind reverts to Neanderthal survival techniques, which we're able to adapt to, survive in some of the harshest environments known to humans 28 to 30, well, 300,000 years ago. We are not those guys. We're not that strong. All of which is a poke in the eye, the rhetorical, political rhetoric that mesmerizes audiences with assurances of everything other than the brutal truth that the prevailing tenor of political, economic neoliberalism, which revolves around profits, is screwing things up. Voting along party lines, you're going to get someone with a soft hand, guys. What we need now is brutality in a way that we have not even sensed it imaginable. I don't mean physically harsh. It's okay, Pat. That's why I put down Fahrenheit too. You don't know Celsius. Listen, you can look those up. So, anyway. But I gave you acres. Come on, Americans, keep up with me. The crisis this time? Well, U.S. capitalism continues to decline with no end in sight. This is not the problem. It's not. The aggression that we're seeing from countries right now, it's because of the facts that I've told you about. It's because of our climate. Even NATO right now is changing Eastern Europe. These things are happening for a reason, guys. All the U.S. threats, missiles in Romania and Poland and Europe at the nuclear front line. Are people really ready to risk war, World War, in the South China Sea? Do you want to go up against those guys? Do you want to go up against Russia and China? For me, that's pretty much the dumbassest thing ever. As you know, we have made some dumbass-near moves politically. We, as in the idiots in charge, who don't want to see what's going on. It's much better to get you to argue with some guy. It's pretty easy to get people to hate. We've got that. We had a Chicago cop. Oh, let me tell you this one. You wouldn't believe it. So, federal lawsuit claims that a Chicago police officer threatened to use a taser on a man who was holding a baby in his arms and warned him that the 1-year-old would feel the electricity. So the lawsuit, filed Tuesday, claims that the entire incident was caught by a security camera. And it names the city and several police officers as defendants. Now, during the October incident, Caesar Carrizales, I think that's really close to how to say his name, was approached by an officer in an alleyway near his garage who demanded that he put his son down on the filthy alleyway. He told officers that the mother of the son would take his child. At this point, the lawsuit claims, an officer began to violently assault him, tried to take the boy from his father's arms. The infant then screamed in a way that Caesar and his mother had never heard the baby scream before. Officers slammed him onto the hood of a police cruiser while he was holding his infant son, pinning the child underneath him. The filing indicates that Caesar was confronted by the police over a neighbor's complaint about damaging a fence on the property line. So it's a contested fence. You know, we used to just maybe yell at each other for that, and threatening the neighbor. So the lawsuit said that even if these allegations were true, they amounted to minor misdemeanor charges. So Caesar, I don't know what they did to him. He pleaded guilty to the misdemeanor of resisting arrest. He was originally charged with aggravated battery against the police officer. But the cops weren't charged. What is going on? Why are we allowing brutality of this nature to happen on this planet? I think we've already slipped well past this. Well past this. You know, Fort McMurray, our fire has already expanded to Saskatchewan. The blaze is now 483,000 hectares in size. It's a massive fire. It's surrounding Fort McMurray, Alberta. Confirmed to have crossed the border into Saskatchewan. Now, according to Alberta Fire information from this morning, the fire is now estimated 483,000 hectares. It's confirmed to have expanded. The nearest village, called Leloc, Saskatchewan, is now more than 30 kilometers from the border, but the smoke and ash has been growing concern, and it's poisonous. As I've said before, that we are experiencing things that have just started. It's just started. This climate change, these disasters are not going to stop, guys. We can't stop this. Not unless we all pull together and go outside and actually start planting something. And that's not even enough. They have found that melanin makes for great batteries. So melanin, basically, the brown in your skin, the brown skin color, is basically acting like photosynthesis. The one that happens in plants. So it's considered the most important chemical reaction in the world, because this is the first step in the food chain. Clues to this process were detected 16th century. Exact nature of the chemical reactions involved still poorly understood. It's about water. It's about the color. And it was still mostly unthinkable that photosynthesis in plants could actually be happening in human beings, but it's true, because we found it in the human eye. It's amazing, the capacity of our body to dissolve the water molecules. And it breaks the paradigm of plants and human beings. We have the very same reaction as the very origins of life itself. The impact, the field, molecular biology is huge. The role of water and glucose needs to be defined. Melanin is basically the human form, or the equivalent of chlorophyll. Melanin is to the animal kingdom as chlorophyll is to the plant. The human body has a photosynthesis system composed of light, melanin, water. Melanin is able to absorb the full electromagnetic spectrum from the sun. That's why we need it. Chlorophyll just absorbs a blue and a red light, basically. This is why plants are surface quantum machines, and animals are the full thickness solar machines. Secondly, melanin has an intrinsic property to split and reform the water molecule. This is important. It's important because of the babies being aborted, being mostly brown-skinned ones on planet Earth right now. Perhaps why brown-skinned people are being put into jails, because we need to look at the underlying things that are happening here on this planet. Because it's huge. And that we were never supposed to be the way we are. It makes no sense. We're much better than this. But if they keep us distracted, as they've been doing, we'll keep fighting. Because people have fought for a long time. And we know on a basic level, I think that we are in trouble here. I do. I think so. We have a 65,000% spike in radiation outside New York nuclear plant. Worse than Fukushima right now. Why aren't we hearing about this? Why? And it's uncontrollable. The flow from Indian Point nuclear power plant. Leaking underground, it goes right to the Hudson River, raising the specter of Fukushima. Only 25 miles from New York City. Indian plant, located on the Hudson, 25 miles, you like that? Miles, north of New York City, serves as electrical needs of an established 2 million people. Last month, while preparing a reactor for refueling, workers accidentally spilt some contaminated water, containing radioactive hydrogen isotope tritium, causing a massive radiation spike in the underground monitoring wells. How is there no impact to health or public safety? Of course, the tritium leak is the 9th this year. 4 of which were serious enough to shut down the reactors. The most recent leak, however, according to an assessment by the New York Department of State, as part of the Coastal Zone Management Assessment, contains a variety of horrific materials: strontium-90, cesium-137, cobalt-60, nickel-63, and is not limited to just tritium. I don't think they can do anything about it. I think this is just the beginning, that we are going to see a cascade of events here. I would like to be much softer about this, but the sleeping giant has awoken. This wildfire has become relentless. And those on the front lines have asked, what made this fire of unprecedented speed different from the hundreds of other blazes that ignite yearly in this region? Well, I'm going to tell you. This is a multi-headed monster. Accurately named the Beast. Very accurately. Within days, it swelled in size from 120 hectares. Okay, so 3,000 acres to over 544,000 acres within days. It cut a path of destruction in the heart of Alberta's oil sands, spewing horrific material into the air that is going to affect us all. No, it is not the rod of God weapon. This was an atmospheric phenomenon. No, guys, it is not. It's not. And I've studied rod of God weapons. This is not it. It's not. We are in an atmosphere that is electrically charged. The sounds are from the electricity. It's happened before. The exact same sounds and sights were heard. This is not a weapon. This is our skies now. Now, if we go back to 2011, a fire in northern Alberta that grew to over 1,000 acres. We go back. 1951. Again, well, the first one was around 2,000 acres. 2011, 1951, 1,400 acres. Becoming one of the largest fires ever seen in North America, basically, is what's happening. But these fires burnt in remote areas of the province before. They've never seen one in a community this size, impacted by a fire of this size. Fire-pitted firefighter crews, often used to battling house blazes, of course, apartments. They put those people against wildfire, capable of spreading through entire cities. The cause of the extreme fire which first ignited in a remote forest area, remains under investigation. Could have been simple stupidity, as we've seen happen over the last couple of days, because when they say there's a fire ban, don't light a fire, you light one, shit happens. Dry, of course. There was no snow in the north. So the ground was cracked. It was waiting for this. It was an accident waiting to happen. So as fire made headlines around the world, people want to ignore that this planet is changing. I don't know how you'll look outside and not see it. People point to El Nino. El Nino. El's child. The god El. I can't see this as an accident. It's an event. Is it enough to explain the extreme fire? I don't know, guys. I just know that during El Nino events, the movie guys, predators come and freaking start haunting us. So I'm ready to look outside, although it's cool here where I live. I'm ready to look outside and start seeing like predator aliens shape-shifting in and out of invisibility. I really am. I really am. But these mild winters up here in Canada saw a fire season start 4 weeks early. Help create tinder-dry conditions. Fire is a natural part of the environment in Canada. This is how the mother restores. And if it weren't for fires, mature forests would suddenly be susceptible to fire and disease. But it makes these kind of extreme fires and these events the new normal. We have a temperature and it's turning into a fever. And many are just trying to ignore it. The snow melts earlier. It leaves soils and vegetation drier. Helps to push the fire season earlier and earlier and earlier. The result is a longer period of year where fires occur. And with that will come more threats. Across Alberta, there are more than 20 wildfires currently burning. Firefighters continue to aggressively focus on the fire that they call the beast, all too conscious of its latent strength and its power. It's a sleeping giant in a forested area. And someday, when it gets hot and dry again, we'll wake up and go for a little walk in the forest and burn some more. This doesn't stop. This continues. This is our new planet. This is where we live now. Now, the other question you'd laugh because it sounds totally unrelated, but I had a pretty cool way to bring it in there. Someone, of all things, asked me about Enochian magic, and I'm like, oh yeah, let me just... There's a friggin' 2-week show. Kind of has to do with the chemtrails too, and I'm not saying they're not a thing. There's a lot going on, not just one thing, right? But the ritual, the angelic ritual ceremonies, the Enochian sex magic, ceremonies. What do they use? Sexual fluids, semen, secretions, blood, power of life stuff. If we're going to talk about Crowley's sex rituals involving consumption, blood, semen, maybe even feces, it's at least alleged that they're intended to achieve some sort of higher consciousness. They empower a talisman. Simply empower oneself, I guess. Intense focus on an intended result during a ritual, especially during an orgasm, paramount to achieving this magic. So are we watching a ritual? It's got to be part of it because they're ignoring. Our planet is being ignored. I can't believe how this is being ignored right now. So we go back to Prince in the biological warfare, especially with the Black Manchurian candidates. Because he only wanted to see us laughing in the purple rain. Purple rain, chemtrail, Illuminati, biological, chemical warfare. Is that going on too? Purple rain could also represent perversion. Today, with all the advances in the secrecy of biotechnology, biological and genetic warfare is no longer a thing of the future. It's here right now. Again, 2016 U.S. presidential election campaigns of Trump and Clinton do ring circus, enormous distractions from real subjects, like the global depopulation chemical, biological and genetic warfare. We will continue to be distracted and shielded from subjects by the governments, by the corporate mass media. In this century, it is widely predicted that advances in biological and biotechnical will revolutionize society, life as we know it. Why they are doing this? Because they can bring back someone from the dead now with brain cells, and you will laugh about what they used. I laugh my butt off. They basically use a chemical from a fish that you can make zombies with, which, if you use it one way, it reanimates brain cells. Use it wrong, you're reanimated, but you're like marbleless, basically. So talk about a biological weapon and that they want to enslave some people. Sure they do. What happens when you use a zombie drug? Your skin goes pale. So I'm sure it has to do with extracting the melanin, which is the only way that we could survive without eating. We'd have to retrain ourselves. But in this century, anyway, we know this is happening. At the same time, the black biology of the biotechnology can be used, is probably being used to create biological weapons. It will be of the greatest threat that we will face, because they will think that a couple of them could live. It's the same technology that could be used to benefit mankind. It may and will paradoxically pose a threat to civilian populations. What about the Zika again? Did you know that the Zika virus was for sale online? This comes from the biological warfare and its manifestations. Thomas W. McGovern, MD, George W. Christopher, and McGovern is a former Army major who was assigned to the Medical Research Institute, Infectious Diseases, Fort Detrick, in the 90s. Viral agents, hemorrhagic viruses. Sorry guys, that was our fastest 2 hours. Later, we will go into it. Yeah, it's that too, because they are going to be harvesting. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you Tuesday, where hopefully we will have found a way through this potential end of the world scenario, and there'll be cookies and unicorns and everything. Bye for now.